Welcome back to Matt Makes Code. In this video, we're going to be building a Ruby on Rails and React.js to-do application. So I'll just give a little demo here for what we're going to be building. I can create a to-do if I wanted to learn Ruby on Rails. When I add that, it's going to add it to my list and it's going to add it to my database. I can complete this once I've finished learning Ruby on Rails. And if I really want, I can just delete it from my list. So it's got the whole create, read, update, and delete functionality, the whole CRUD app. So by the end of this video, you're going to know how to integrate Ruby on Rails and React.js, as well as have a project for your GitHub or CV. So if this video helps you in any way, could you please like and subscribe to the channel? And with that, we can get straight into it. I'm in my Visual Studio Code. I've got my terminal open here, and I'm in my projects directory. So let me zoom in for you guys so you can see a bit better. What we want to do first is actually create our Rails application. So we're going to do that with the command Rails new. But this app is going to be a bit different to a regular Ruby on Rails app because we're creating APIs. So we put --API and then the name of what we're going to call it, which is going to be Backend. The reason why we put --API is basically going to set our controllers as APIs straight away, so we don't have to manually do that. Saves us some time. And then we want to go into our Rails folder, and now we want to create our controllers and we want to create our models, and we're only going to have one, which is going to be our to-do. We could do this manually, which would take a lot of time. So Rails has its own command to create your model, your controller, and all the functions inside of that controller, including viewing all your to-dos, creating your to-do, updating it, and destroying it. So that will be created all for us. And the command to do that is Rails generate scaffold and then name. So that's going to be to-do. Then we need to pass the arguments we want it to have. So it's going to have a to-do name and it's going to be completed. So to-do name, give it a data type, which will be string, and then boolean, then completed, which will be a boolean. And that's going to go ahead and create our scaffold. So if I show you what I mean, if you go to your app folder in Backend, you'll find your controllers and your models. So you can see it's created our to-do model here, and it's also created our controller. So it's got all these functions to view all of our to-dos, view a specific one, create one, update it, and destroy. And it gives that all for us. So the first thing I want to do is actually edit this file. And the only function we really need to actually change is this one here, because I'm only going to be updating the completed field. So when we check the checkbox and it completes it, uncompletes it. The reason why we need to edit this one is because it's taken in all the to-do parameters. So it takes in the name and the completed. Whereas we only want to take in the completed if we're only handling completed, if you know what I mean. So every time I check the checkbox, I don't want to pass it the name, which I'd have to do with this function. So all I have to do is, if I change this name to update completed, and instead of this, we're going to have completed. So changing the completed argument in the to-do model, and then it's going to get the completed parameter, which send it. And yeah, that's the only change we need for that function. For create here, just get rid of the location at to-do. We just don't need that. And then up here, because we've changed our update, that we have no longer have that function, we want to replace it with update completed. Okay, and that's it for the controller for now. So the next thing I want to do is actually create a namespace. So that's how we're going to call this this controller. And if I just quickly, before we run it, we want to run it. So if I quickly just Rails DB migrate, which is going to migrate our model into our database. Clear. So make sure you migrate before you actually run the server. We're going to do Rails server. Okay. So our Rails server is running on here. So if I go, yeah, you can see it runs. Okay. I want my API to be called from /API, and then if I want to get all the to-dos, it'll be /to-dos, right? But I want to have this /API, and the way we do this is using a namespace. To create a namespace, we need to head over, so close that. You need to head over to config, and then down to roots. So this is where we're going to define all the roots, which are going to like the APIs we're going to call. So if you get rid of all that, we're going to create a namespace. We're going to call it API. Like I said, we're going to call API. It's going to call it API, and then in that, we want to get our resources for to do. So the resources are just like the standard functions it created from the scaffold, like getting all the to-dos, creating one, destroying it, and updating it. So we want to get them from to-dos. But because we created our own in update completed, this won't be part of the resources. So we need to actually add that ourselves. And we're going to do that by adding member. Then we're going to do a patch, which means the update request. We called it update completed. So that's created our namespace. Now we actually need to just make a change to our controllers. So the namespace will be called if we add a folder called API in controllers, and then we move our to-dos controller into API. So make a API folder in controllers and then move your to-dos controller in there. And then the last thing for that is before your to-dos controller here, before its name, you need to add the namespace. So a capital A, then PI, and colon, just like that. And there you go, you've got your namespace. So if I run and I actually go to API/to-dos, you can see I'm actually calling my to-dos, and I haven't added any, so that's why it's an empty array. Before we actually add some data to our database, we need to handle how we'd call it from the front end. So basically, not everyone can call our API. We don't want that because that's very unsafe. So we want to enable calls for our front end. And the way we do that is if we go to our gem file, and then we want to install a gem. So it's going to be called rack cores. And then we need to actually install it. So if you just create another terminal, you want to actually install it. So you're going to do that by doing bundle install, and that's going to install all our gems. So that's now successfully installed. Just going to delete that terminal. And then we can head over to our config file again, and you want to go into initializers and then cores, okay? And then you want to uncomment all this code. So this is what's gonna allow, it's at the moment, it's allowing example.com. Well, our front end isn't gonna be running on example.com, it's gonna be running on localhost 3001 because we're currently running on 3000. So if you allow localhost 3001, then it should work. And you'll have to restart your server as well for it to work. So if I actually start my server, now what I want to do, so that's actually our backend actually fully completed. We've made all the changes we need and it's ready to be called. The last thing we want to do is just actually make some data and put it into our database, and we do that using a seeder file. So if you head over to DB database and go over to seeds, and this is where we're gonna add our seed data. So if you write to do destroy all, this function is just gonna destroy all the data of to do objects in your database, and that's so every time we call the seeder file, we don't want to keep adding loads and loads of data, so we'll just destroy it, then add all the new data. and then we're going to make a new to-do. So to-do name, we'll call it test1. And then what we'll do is we'll give it completed happy false. Okay. Then you want to write db Rails db seed. That's going to seed that data in the database. And then clear, and then run Rails S one more time. Now it's running. If I head over to here and refresh, you're going to see we have our to do. Okay. But that's the only way. By going to the Rails, we can only test the calling to get all our to-dos. We can't do like a create a to-do or update them. And I don't want to create my front end straight away and find out that my API is broken or it's not working. So the way we actually test them is using like a testing software. What I'm going to use is something called Postman. And this way we're going to be able to call our APIs and see if they're actually working. And I advise you download it because it's kind of an industry standard as well. And you'll be able to go along with me. So once you've got this installed, you can go over to, you should be in your collections, and you've got this plus button here. Just create a blank collection, give it a name, Rails API. And then we want to create a new request. So we'll just call this get API. And then what we're going to do is, it's this what we're calling here. So if you just copy and paste that in here, it's going to create that get request, and it's going to get all our to-dos here. But now we can actually create a to-do with a request, and that's going to be a post request. It's going to be the same URL, so we're still calling this a post. We actually need to give it some data. So if you go to body here and then go to raw, then we want to make a JSON. So if we do to-do name, and then we'll call it test2, then give it completed, and that's going to be false. This can't be completed straight away, right? If we send that data in, you can see it returns it here. If you go back to your get to-dos, then you can see we've got both the to-dos here and the new one here. I want to create another request. So this is going to be to update a to-do. The way we're going to do that is you call this as a patch, which is updating, and you either pass in the URL, you either pass in the ID. So as you can see, we got an ID of 1 and an ID of 2. I'm going to update my new to-do. So if I call the ID 2 here, and you pass in the body, I want to say that, because we're updating if it's complete or not. Complete. Say it's true. And I actually forget that you have to add the name of, because when we went into the roots, that's the name what we're completing. So you need to pass this at the end as well. So the to-dos is the to-do with the second ID, and we call it update completed. And you can see that is changed to true. And if you get your to-dos, then you can see that is now true, and that one's false. Then one last request is delete. So if we do the same thing, I'm actually going to delete the first one. So you're calling API to-dos and then 1 at the end. So you don't need to add an extra function at the end because this is part of resources. If you call that, no error was thrown. So if you go to get to-dos, then the ID of 1 should disappear, and it does. So we've successfully created all the to-dos, all the APIs, and yeah, they work fine. So that's our backend actually fully completed. So now it's time to create our front end. So if I go and close all these, I'm going to keep my backend running because I'm going to have to call this. So I'll make a new terminal. Let's bring this up for you. So now I want to create my React front end. I'm going to do this with a command called npx create React app, and we'll call it frontend. We'll let that run. So just to notice that I am actually in the project directory, I'm no longer in the backend, I'm in the project one. So it should come alongside here, it shouldn't be in here. And it's going to take a while to install. So now it's installed, you want to go into your project. So go into front end now. We need to make some installations. So we want to install Axios and we want to install React icons. So if you put npm install Axios, and Axios is going to be what we use to make our API request. And then we'll do npm install React icons, and that's just so we can have like some icons on our page to make it look a bit nicer. So that's actually done, and now we can run our app. So npm start, and because our Rails app's already running on localhost 3000, we're just gonna say yes, so it's just gonna put it on localhost 3001. Okay, and if I put that here, it'll be easier to see us update our file as we go. So yep, our React app is running. If we head over to our front end and then our source and then your app.js file, this is the code that's running our React app. I just want to delete that all. And then let's just create a quick title, so a h1 tag, and we'll put to do app. See, to do app shows that. We want to give this a class name. Yeah, I'm just going to be styling like the main layout of the whole app background and the title, and then I'll move on to the to-dos. So we'll give this a class name of title, and then we'll head over to our app.css file, because this is being called here. And then we don't need any of this, it's just the default text. So we want to create our background. Text align center is fine, we want that. We want to make it a flex. We want to make the width 100 visual width, so we want the whole width of the screen. We want the height to have a minimum height of 100 visual height, so it's going to go the whole height of the page, and if it needs to, it will go more. We want all the content to be centered, so justify content center, and then we want to give it some padding on the we will give it some padding on the top. We'll say 50 pixels. You see it comes down there, and then we also, it's like just white at the background now, so we'll just change the background color, and we'll make it, say FC. It's a bit of a, I don't know, really light shaded grey. So we've got that, and before I actually start styling the title, we want to create a container. So we'll create another div. We just call it app container. So dot app container. We also have our dot title. And in app container, we want everything to be stacked on top of each other vertically. So we're going to do display inline flex, and then we want it to be lined in columns, which is going to be stacked on top of each other. We also want it to be like contained. We don't want it touching like the sides of the screen, so we don't want our to-dos to be going the whole width of the screen. So we'll give it a width of 92% of the container of the whole screen. And then we also don't want it to be 92% if we're the whole screen, otherwise the to-dos are going to be so long. We want to make it so that they only reach like a maximum, let's say 600 pixels. You'll see what I mean if you don't understand when we actually create the to-do in a couple of minutes, that basically the to-do will stop about here, so they're not like really large. I don't know why it's really laggy, but then we want to give our text a bit of a bigger font size and make it a bit more bold. There you go, looks a lot better. So that's it. What we want to do next is actually create a to-do. So what we're going to do is we're going to head over to our source file, create a new folder, and we'll call it components. So we're going to put all our different components in this file. And then if we create a new component called todo.js, we can create our component in here. So we'll call it const todo, just be a function, then we'll return, not return, export default to do. This means our app file can grab our to do, and I'd recommend you import this straight away so that we can see like the visual changes we're doing. There you go, it's imported. So if we return, we'll make a div. So what we're going to do is we'll give this a class name of to do. We can edit the CSS a bit. So dot to do. We want this to do to have a border so we can see it. So if it has a border, we'll say 1 pixel solid, and we'll just make it black. There you go. We'll make sure it has like a minimum height. Right. Put a semicolon there of 100 pixels. There you go. See the box there. We'll make it look a bit nicer, so we'll just give it a border radius. We'll give it 8 pixels. There you go. Looks a bit smoother there. Now what we want to do is inside here we want to make a to-do container, and basically we're going to have our checkbox on the left, our to-do name in the middle, and then our delete button on the right. So if we create a class name called to-do container, and for I'll do some styling after that, but I'll actually just create the components first so I can show you why we need the container. In here we're going to want an input, which is going to be our checkbox, so we'll just have a type equals checkbox. See the checkbox there, and then we want just say a h3 tag, so some text. We'll call it to do 1, and then we want a button. So to get a delete button, like I said, we installed React icons. Just open your browser and type in React icons. It's the first web page here. And you can just type in any icon you want really. So I want not an update, a delete icon. And quite like this one. So literally just copy and paste this at the top of your page. So it's going to import it. You can copy that and then paste it in there. If you save, it's there. You can play around the size of it. So if I want 20 pixels, it gets a bit bigger. So this is why we need a to-do container, because obviously they're all stacked on top of each other. We want, in our to-do container, we want to make them all like horizontally in line. So to-do container what I named it. Yeah. So I want that to be inline flex, but not vertically anymore. So the flex direction will be as a row. You can see that's already in rows. And then I also want them to be like in thirds, and they're going to be separate from each other. The way we do that is justify content and have space between them. But for that to actually work, it has to be the width of the container. So if I made that 100%, they're going to go to either ends. But if I made it, say, 90, it's going to give them a bit of a gap between the ends. So make that with 90, and then I also want it to be full height there, so that gets centered. And then if to actually center it vertically, we use align items and then make it center. And now everything's aligned, and that looks pretty good to me. So it's actually not much I want to do there. What I want to do next, so I don't want to have my to-dos in here. I want to have another component called to-do list, and it'll be a list of all my to-dos. So if I create a new file, call it to-do list.js, then create a new function called to-do list. It's going to be a div again. And I want to import my to-dos. Basically, put my to-dos in here. I can say I could put 3 in here. And instead of importing to-do in my app, I want to import a to-do list. To do that, I need to actually export it. My bad. To-do list. Then to-do list will come up. I'll put that there. And then you can see I get 3 of them. But they're all bundled on top of each other. And yeah, I want to make sure they stay vertical. So again, we're going to have to make a to-do list class. So I'll just call it to-do list. Head into our CSS. To-do list. And again, it's going to be another flex. So display inline flex. And we want it vertically again, so it's flex direction column. So it will stay that way. But these are all touching each other. I don't want that, so I'll give it a gap, and we'll say 20 pixels. So they got a nice gap there. And then one last thing, I think it's a bit close to the title. So if I just give it a margin top of, let's say, like 30 pixels. Sorry, empty margin top 30 pixels. That looks a bit better to me. So in my to-do list, I've just got 3 static to-dos. What I want to do is I want to pass a prop to the to-do. So we'll pass the prop to-do list. And we'll give it names, so to-do 1, copy and paste this. To-do 2, to-do 3. Then my to-do, I can take a prop called to-do list. And then I can put it here. Then you can see to-do 1, to-do 2, to-do 3. And that's actually pretty much it for like the static look of my page. Now what I want to do is actually call my backend and get all the to-dos from my database. So if I go to my source folder and create a new folder, I'm going to call it API, and we'll call the file endpoints.js. And in here, we're going to create all our endpoints. So if I look at this, I want to import Axios, which we're going to use to make our API requests. But first we need to state the URL we're going to be calling. And if you remember, we were calling, so copy and paste this, /API/todos. So yeah, we're calling this URL, and the base of it is just this, and then we have all the different names after. So we want to be making a base URL of this. So I just make a constant base_URL equals, that's the name of the API we're calling. I'll make another URL and we'll call it get URL. And that's going to have the base URL as well as to-dos at the end. So now we've got our URLs, we can actually create a function to grab the to-dos. So const get to-dos equals async. So this function has to be asynchronous as we're dealing with API requests. So I'll show you how we're going to use the asynchronous. So if we make const response equals, we use this command called await. It basically means we're not going to execute any other code until this code has actually executed, until we've got our data from our API. So we'll do a response, await, and then we're going to do Axios, making a get request, and get URL. Now we want to actually return our response data. So we just go return response data. We need to make sure we can export this so we can grab it from our app. So in our app function, we're going to be actually setting the list of our to-dos, and we're going to use something called React hooks to do that. So if you import two hooks called useState and useEffect from React, and then we set a state called to-dos, let's get a default value of an empty array. So what this is that we can have this to-dos value, and it also comes along with a function where we can set that value of the to-do, and the value of this to-do is defaulted to this here, and we've just started it as an empty array. Now what we want to do is use our useEffect hook, and what this is going to do is going to execute all of the code in here when the page renders. So every time this reloads, it's going to execute here. So what I can do is actually fetch the to-dos every time this page loads. So let's create a function called fetch to-dos. It's got to be asynchronous again. Async. And then what we want to do is we want to call our function we just made in our endpoints. To-dos equals get await, and make sure you use the await command. And then we want to set our value here. So set to-dos, make it plural. Make sure we set to-dos to the to-dos we grab. And if I actually just console.log to-dos to check we're actually getting them, make sure we're calling this function. So in this useEffect, every time the page loads, we're going to be calling this function, which is going to get the to-dos, it's going to set this value to to-dos, and it's going to print them out. So if I go to inspect and console, you can see we've got the array here. If I refresh, we've got the arrays here. And sometimes it will run twice as well, but it doesn't matter. So we got the array here, and that's exactly what we want. So if I make another prop called to-dos, and I pass in the to-dos that we fetched, get rid of that, and I can go over to my to-do list as I pass in a new prop. So it's got to accept to-dos, Now I want to create a list of all the to-dos we've got, and the way we can do this is using something called map in JavaScript. So if we do to-dos, so the to-do here, dot map, we grab one to-do, and then we want to return our to-do component. So for each to-do, the reason why this happened is because I actually haven't passed any data through yet, but for each to-do, I want to create a to-do component and pass in its data. So with a map, you have to create a key, and we'll make this equal to the to-do.id, as every to-do has an ID from our database. And then we want to make the to-do name equal to to-do.to-do name. So this is the to-do name in the database. And sorry, not to-do list. That's wrong. To-do name. Sorry about that. There you go. And it actually works. If you remember, we deleted our test1 and we changed our test2 to be true and all that. So we successfully grabbed all the to-dos in our database, and now we need to actually make it so we can create new to-dos. So we're gonna have to go into our components again, and we're gonna have to create add to do.js. Make that lowercase d. Okay. So yeah, we want to add a to-do, and we're gonna do const add to-do, and then we want to export this. Make sure you export default, and like always, go back into your app, import add to-do. Okay, we're going to put it actually above our list, so put it here, but we haven't actually made anything, so nothing's going to render on the page. So what this is going to have, it's going to have an input field, so we can type in what we want to add, and it's going to have a button so we can click and it will add it to our list. Before I actually start building that component, I'm going to create another endpoint so I can add the URLs. So if I export const create to do equals async, and then const response equals await axios dot post request, and then need to make a new URL. It's actually the same as our get URL. I'll make another variable just to make it a bit distinctive, but it's actually the same, but instead it's a post request. If you can remember, in our postman, it's literally the same here, but it's a post request instead. So we're going to make a post, but the difference is we need to pass in some data. So we're going to be creating it from a to-do name, and that's going to be equal to a to-do name that's passed inside. And then we also want to set completed, we'll set that to false. Okay, and that's going to create a to-do. Then we want to return the response.data that we get from that. Okay, so in our app again, we want to create a function called add to do async, and then we're going to call create to do inside here, and then this will pass in to do name, pass in to do name. Okay, so now we can pass this to our add to do. So we're going to pass in this function, and then we can finally start building it now. And that's going to take in add to do. There you go. So what this is going to return, it's going to return div with two things in it. It's going to have an input field, which is going to have a type text, and then it's going to have a button, which will say add to do. Okay. And they're going to be next to each other. I'll give this a class name of add to do, and then this will have a class name of add input, then add button. Okay, now we can head back to our CSS and give it some styling. So it's called add to do dot add input, and then dot add button. Okay, so we want to add some styling to this, so we want to make it a bit lower from the text, so we say 20 pixels. We want these to be, sorry, there you go. We want these to be right next to each other. I know they are now, but we'll make sure they are. So display inline flex, and then flex direction, make sure they're column, and then sorry, row. There you go. And then we also want them to be centered. So if we do line item center, justify content center, then they'll be centered. And then we also want them to cover the whole width of the container. So there you go. Now I want my input to be 80% of that container, and I want it to have a height of about 30 pixels, and then I want my button to have a width of 20%, and then it's just going to be the height of the input here, so it's 100%, and that is all the styling done for our button and our input field. If I go over to add to do, then I want to create a state again. So if I import, I don't need use effect, but I need to use state. So I want to get everything that the user inputs here, right? The way I'm going to do that is by creating a state, and I'll do const input set input, and its default is just going to be an empty string because there's nothing in there when the page loads. And then we can do something called onChange. What it's going to do is it's going to call set input, and it's going to, every time this value changes, it's going to set the input value here to what's in here. So what I mean by that, so it will change here, so it will change by A, and then because it's changed, it's going to set the value to whatever's in here. So it's going to set input to A. It's going to do that every time we type. So it'll be this, whatever. And now I want to create a function called handle add. And what this is going to do is it's going to call our function, which we pass through, which is going to add our to do to our database, calling the API. It's going to add whatever we put in the input. Okay. And then also when we add, we want to clear our input field. So we'll just set input to an empty string again. So on the button, on click, we want to handle add. And hopefully when we press the button, so if I put test 3, it's going to add it. And the reason why it hasn't added it straight away, if I refresh, it adds it here. Okay. So the reason it does that is because it's not handling it on the client side. Okay, it's not updating straight away on the client side. And the way we do that is in this function, it creates the to do here. So if we change that so we have a to do equal to what's created, we can actually append it to our list, right? So we can use something called a rest function. So if we set our client side to do's, so what's being shown here, to a new array with our new to do at the front. So what we create here is going to be put at the front, and we use the rest parameter to get all the to do's already in the array. So this could be like the to do is now at the top, and we got the rest of the to do's in this array. So when we do test 4, you can see it adds straight away. We got one problem here, is that it goes test 4, test 2, test 3, and basically these are in a ascending order and not descending order, so the newest to-dos aren't going first. That's actually a problem with our backend. So if we go into our backend again, into our app, into our controllers, into our API, into our to-dos controller, we just need to change this to just have a check is to-do.order, then created at, and then you want to put descending. Okay, you can close that. And if you refresh this, test 4, test 3, test 2. The next step is to actually delete a to-do. So if we go ahead and close the to-dos controller, and we head to our endpoints. So we're going to have to create a new URL. So if we do const delete URL equals, and just copy and paste this. It's going to be to-dos, but it's going to be /id. So we can actually make this as a function. So if we put id, and then we could do slash id like that, and then we can create a new function called delete to do. Just going to accept an ID, and that's going to call axios.delete. It's a delete request. It's going to be a delete URL. Just going to take in the ID, and that's actually it. So you can return response.data. Add these here, just make it a bit tidier. Okay, so go to your app.js file, and you're going to create a function called delete to do this time. Pass an ID, and you're gonna you want to import delete to do, and you're gonna call that function we just made in endpoints with the ID. So we actually want to pass this to our to-do list. So we'll pass, we need to add an either, so we'll pass that to our to-do list. So delete to do, which we're actually just gonna pass straight to our to do. It's just gonna be delete to do. But you also need to add one more thing, one more prop to our to do, which is gonna be the ID. So that's just gonna be to do.id. And then if you go to do, it's now going to accept an ID, and it's also going to accept delete to do, the function. So we can make something called const handle delete, and that's just going to call that function with the ID of the to-do. And then if we click the delete icon, it's going to delete it. So we run that and it deletes, but that's only on refresh. So we have to go back to app.js, and it's the same thing as we did in add to do here. We need to handle the client side. So this time, instead of adding it to an array, we're taking it out. And to do that, we can set to do to todos.filter. So basically, we're gonna filter the array to have to-dos that doesn't have that ID. So this is the ID of the to-do we're deleting, and it's going to go through the array and check if each to-do has this ID. If it does, it's not going to include it. So for to-do, ID doesn't put to-do.id doesn't equal ID. And this time, if I delete test3, it goes straight away. So let's add a new one. Let's just say subscribe to @Matt makes code. Because if you've made it this far, you might as well. And if you could like the video, add a little heart. There you go. There's still one thing we need to do, because if I check this, it doesn't save. It's not actually doing anything. So we need to create an update function. So if we head back to our endpoints, we can update URL. That's going to pass an ID just like that. We can actually pull that. This one's going to be a bit different though, because remember we made it a different function, so it's going to be /update completed after the ID. And then we create a new function called update to do. There's an equals there. So await active, and it's going to be a patch request as we're updating. Not that. Axios.patch. We're going to pass in our update URL. I'm just going to take the ID, pass in here. Also, it's going to take the completed, so we're going to have to pass completed and then the value that's passed in. So this is our update to do function. We need to return response.data. And then if we don't actually have to set anything on app.js this time, it's just going to be straight in the to do. So we can import update to do and handle complete is the function we're going to do. It's actually going to have to be an asynchronous function. We'll do this as well because it's good practice. So put await there. Now what we want to do is call our update to do. But what are we going to pass in here? So if you go back to your to-do list, we were actually meant to pass in completed. So whether it's completed in the database, so to-do.completed, that's in your to-do list here. Then your to-do, you're going to pass in completed. Next we want to add the ID and the opposite of what the original completed value is into our function, because if it's not completed and we're checking it, it should become completed and vice versa. So when we click that, that's what we'll send, and then the ID of the to-do there, and then it should be checked if it is completed. So you can see when we changed it in Postman to true, you can see it's checked there, and then on change, do on click, handle complete. So when I click this button, you can see it changes, but I have to refresh the page still. So this is where we're gonna have to introduce, not const, use state again, so we can handle the client side. So we do const is checked and set checked as our state, and the default value is actually going to be the value passed in. So is checked is set to the completed value. So at the moment, is checked for this would be true, for this it would be false. So instead of passing in completed, we're going to pass in is checked, and when we handle complete, we're going to set checked to the opposite. And then it's going to be checked if is checked is true. And this is a good way of handling the client side and the server side. So just for example, if I check this one, check straight away. I can uncheck these. There you go. And I believe that is actually it. So if I said watch other videos I'll just put MMM. That could be my new name. So watch other videos, and if you like the video, you can check that. Or if you really don't want this one here, you can delete it. So that is a CRUD app in Ruby and Rails and React. If this video helped you, could you please like the video and subscribe to the channel? And it's another project you've got for your GitHub or your CV or whatever. So thanks a lot for staying along, and I hope to see you in the next video. Cheers.